On her 19th birthday, Omega Nora expects to be claimed by her fated mate, the future Alpha Caleb. Instead, at the sacred moon ceremony, he publicly rejects her. Before the entire Moonstone pack, he declares her weak and unsuitable, shattering their bond and choosing her cruel, ambitious sister, Victoria. Utterly broken, Nora's life is over, but her collapse is witnessed by a silent, terrifying observer. The legendary Lykan King Dominic is present. He's enraged by the insult to the goddess and intrigued by the scent of the rejected Omega. The air in the grand clearing crackled with energy that was half magic, half anticipation. It smelled of ancient pine, damp earth, and the metallic tang of shifting wolves. Nora, an Omega of the Moonstone pack, stood near the back, as was her place. Her hands were clammy, twisting the rough fabric of her simple linen dress. Tonight was the moon ceremony. Tonight was her 19th birthday. Tonight, her life would finally begin. For years, the bond had been a quiet hum beneath her skin, a silver thread connecting her to him. Caleb, the future Alpha. Their fated mating was the pack's worst-kept secret, a source of whispered envy, and for Nora, a fragile, desperate hope. It was the one thing that made being an Omega, the pack's lowest-ranking member, bearable. Her gaze drifted to the front of the clearing, where her older sister, Victoria, stood among the elite. Victoria was beautiful, her dark hair gleaming in the moonlight, her laughter loud and confident. She'd always overshadowed Nora, always been the popular one, the one their parents praised. Nora felt the familiar, dull ache of inadequacy, but she pushed it down. Tonight, popularity didn't matter. Rank didn't matter. Only the moon goddess and the fate she had decreed. The pack Alpha, Caleb's father, raised his hands. A hush fell over the hundreds of wolves assembled. Tonight, his deep voice boomed, we honor the moon goddess. We honor the bond she gifts us. We secure the future of the Moonstone pack. A howl rose from the crowd. Nora shivered, the sound vibrating deep in her bones. The moon climbed higher, a perfect, luminous circle of power, casting the clearing in ethereal silver and black. Nora's breath hitched. She could feel it now, the pull. The bond was flaring, becoming a tangible rope in her gut, tugging her forward. He was close. Caleb was feeling it too. He stepped into the center of the clearing. Caleb was everything an Alpha should be. Tall, broad-shouldered, with an air of command that made others bow instinctively. His eyes scanned the crowd, sweeping past the front ranks, over his fawning admirers, and finally landing directly on her. He stared, his expression unreadable, his eyes dark in the moonlight. The clearing felt silent, shrinking until it was just the two of them. The pull in her stomach became an undeniable yank. Then his voice, booming with the dominance of his alpha blood, cut through the night. Nora. He had called her. He had called her name. A dizzying wave of relief and joy washed over her. The whispers around her confirmed it. It was real. This was it. Come, Caleb commanded. Her legs, shaking, obeyed. She pushed past the other Omegas, her head held high for the first time in her life. She walked toward her destiny, her fated mate, her future. She was so focused on his face that she almost missed the look in his eyes. It wasn't the warmth of a destined lover. It was cold, sharp, and full of contempt she had never seen before. But she was already moving, already committed. The entire pack's attention fixed on her as she stepped into the center of the clearing. Nora stood frozen, a sacrifice offered to an angry god. The silence was absolute. Even the night insects had ceased their chirping. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, but the only ones she could see were Caleb's. They were as cold and hard as chips of obsidian. The love she thought she'd seen in them for years was a phantom, a story she had told herself. This was the truth. This was the real Caleb. Caleb, she whispered, the sound stolen by the heavy night air. Her bond was a live wire, screaming, "Mate, mate, mate," while her instincts screamed danger. He didn't answer. He simply watched her, his expression a mask of bored calculation. From the corner of her eye, Nora was vaguely aware of the guests of honor on the raised granite platform. The pack alpha sat beside an empty seat with the other visiting dignitaries. It was said a representative of the Lykan King himself was present, a formality for the ceremony of a prominent pack. Nora's humiliation was not just private, it was political. Caleb let the silence stretch, wringing every drop of power from it. He let her tremble, let the pack's whispers start to rise. "An Omega," someone hissed. "He can't be serious," another murmured. Caleb raised a hand, and the whispers died instantly. He looked at her, but he spoke to the pack, his voice a polished, confident baritone. "We gather under the goddess's eye to secure the future of our pack. A future that must be powerful. A future that must be pure. A future that cannot be built on a mistake of fate." Mistake. The word hit Nora like a physical slap. The joy and relief that had carried her to the center of the clearing curdled into cold, sickening dread. "For years," Caleb continued, pacing slowly around her, "we have assumed the goddess's will." He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell the sharp scent of mint and pine on him. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, cruel tone, meant only for her, though the entire pack watched. "Did you really think," he sneered, "that you could be Luna? Did you really think I would bind myself to weakness?" Her breath hitched. The hope that had been her only shield for 19 years began to crack. She looked to his father, the Alpha, but he was watching his son with a guarded expression, making no move to intervene. Caleb straightened up, his face hardening as he turned back to the crowd. He took a deep, theatrical breath, puffing his chest with the dominance of his bloodline. The moon was at its absolute zenith, its white light pouring down on him like a spotlight. He was the perfect picture of a future alpha. And he was about to pass his first sentence. His eyes met hers one last time, devoid of any warmth, any history, any mercy. "Our future must be strong," he declared, his voice ringing with finality. He pointed a single damning finger directly at her. "I, Caleb, future alpha of the Moonstone Pack," he roared, his voice amplified by supernatural power, "do publicly reject you, Nora, as my fated mate." The word struck Nora with the force of a physical blow. It was not just an emotional wound. It was a spiritual cataclysm. A searing, blinding pain erupted in her chest as the silver thread of their fated bond, the one she had felt since she was 17, was not cut, but torn. It felt like her very soul was being ripped in half. She gasped, a strangled, inhuman sound, and stumbled back, clutching her chest as the agony brought her to her knees. The pack gasped as one. This was not a simple severing. This was a public execution of a sacred pact. Caleb watched her collapse with a look of profound disgust. "The moon goddess was mistaken," he spat, his voice dripping with arrogance. He pointed to her, a trembling, weeping heap on the ground. "Our pack cannot be led by weakness. We cannot be represented by this." He sneered. "She is weak. She is unsuitable. And she is nothing but an Omega." The last word was a curse. The pain in her chest flared, white-hot and blinding. She couldn't breathe. The world was tilting, the silver moonlight turning sickly and gray. She could hear the whispers now, the shock giving way to murmurs of agreement. He was the Alpha. His word was law. If he said she was weak, she was weak. Her world had shattered. The one person who was supposed to be her destiny, her protector, her other half, was the one wielding the knife. She looked up, desperate through a haze of tears. She looked at Caleb's father, who sat stone-faced. She looked at the pack members she had known her whole life, who now looked away, their faces a mixture of pity and contempt. She was alone. She was nothing. But the ceremony was not over. The pack still needed a Luna. "My pack," Caleb announced, his voice smooth and confident once more, "deserves a real Luna. A strong Luna. One I have chosen." The pain was still a tidal wave drowning her, but through it, Nora heard his words. Her vision blurred. Chosen. He was turning away from her. He was scanning the crowd, his eyes landing on someone in the front rank among the elite warriors. A triumphant smile lit his face. Nora, on her hands and knees, followed his gaze. He was moving, his purpose clear. He was walking toward the one person she had always loved, always trusted. He was walking toward her sister. Nora's mind, numb and buzzing with the agony of the broken bond, struggled to process what she was seeing. Caleb wasn't just walking toward Victoria. He was walking for her. Victoria, her beautiful, popular, perfect older sister, stepped forward from the crowd. There was no surprise on her face. No sisterly concern for Nora, who was still bleeding her soul onto the cold earth of the clearing. Instead, a slow, triumphant smile spread across Victoria's face. It was a look of pure, calculated victory. This was not a surprise. This was a coronation. Caleb reached her and without a word grabbed Victoria by the waist. He pulled her into a deep, passionate, and possessive kiss. Right in front of Nora. Right in front of the entire pack. It was a declaration. A branding. The pack's stunned silence turned into a new, confused murmur. Caleb broke the kiss, but he kept Victoria plastered against his side. He lifted her, hand, his eyes blazing with pride. "This is your future, Luna," he roared. "Victoria, my chosen mate." For a moment, the pack hesitated. To reject a fated mate was a profound insult to the goddess, but to defy a future alpha was pack suicide. Slowly, a few scattered claps began, then a few more. Within moments, the clearing was filled with a ragged, uncertain, but growing cheer. They were choosing their alpha. They were choosing power over fate. They were choosing Victoria over Nora. The sound of their applause was a second assault. Nora, forgotten on the ground, felt the last of her strength leave her. She looked up, her vision tunneling, her breath coming in shallow, painful rasps. Through the haze of her tears, she saw her sister. Victoria was looking right at her over Caleb's shoulder as he nuzzled her neck and accepted the pack's adulation. Victoria's eyes met hers. She didn't look away. She held her sister's broken gaze and she smirked. It was a small, vicious, knowing expression that said, "You never had a chance. He was always mine." The dual betrayal, her mate, her sister, was a final killing blow. The agony in her chest, the public humiliation, and the crushing weight of that single, triumphant smirk was more than her spirit could bear. The world went black at the edges. Her body, no longer able to support even her grief, gave out. Nora collapsed unconscious onto the damp earth. The last sound she registered was the pack cheering for Caleb and Victoria. But as her consciousness faded, a new sound cut through the celebration. It was not a cheer. It was a low, resonant growl that vibrated in her very bones. It was a sound of ancient, cold, and absolute fury. The cheering for the new alpha pair died instantly, frozen in the pack's throats. The air, which moments before had been filled with celebration, suddenly became heavy, cold, and electric with dread. That growl had not come from a moonstone wolf. It was too deep, too old, too saturated with a power that choked the breath from their lungs. Alpha Marcus, Caleb's father, had been rising to congratulate his son. He froze. The growl echoed again, this time seeming to come from everywhere at once. The pressure in the clearing dropped. The silver moonlight seemed to dim as if a great cloud had passed over the moon. A terrifying ancient power rolled over the assembly like a physical wave, pressing down on every wolf. It was pure, unadulterated dominance. Omegas and betas were forced to their knees. Warriors and even Caleb himself bowed their heads, their wolves whining in submission. Alpha Marcus was forced to bend his knee, a profound act of submission on his own territory. This was not pack authority. This was the authority of the world. Every eye, wide with terror, turned to the raised granite platform reserved for the guests of honor. A figure was emerging from the deep shadows, stepping into the dying moonlight. He had been a silent observer, a formality. He was interfering now. It was King Dominic, the legendary ruthless Lykan King, the ruler of all packs, the alpha of alphas, the last of the ancient bloodline. He was a myth of terror told to disobedient pups. And he was here. He was tall, dressed in dark, severe leathers that made no sound, and he moved with a fluid grace that was more predator than man. His power radiated from him in visible, suffocating waves, but it was his eyes that held the pack captive. They were not the blue, brown, or even yellow of a normal werewolf. They were burning with an unnatural molten gold light, and they were not looking at Caleb, the new alpha. They were not looking at Victoria, the new Luna. They were not looking at Alpha Marcus. His gaze, blazing with terrifying cold fury, was fixed on the small, broken form of the rejected Omega, lying unconscious in the dirt. The king was enraged. The pack could smell it. It was not the hot, quick anger of a pack dispute. It was the cold, patient, absolute wrath of an ancient force. He took one slow, deliberate step off the platform and onto the sacred ground of the clearing. He began to walk, his eyes never leaving Nora. The king was moving. King Dominic stood over her, a mountain of shadow and power. The pack was so quiet he could hear the frantic pounding of their hearts. They were terrified, as they should be. He had come to the Moonstone Pack to observe. Their alpha, Marcus, had been petitioning him for greater territory, and Dominic had come to judge his worthiness. And this was what he found. A circus, a sacrilege. His golden eyes were fixed on Nora. He could smell the spiritual rot of her broken bond, a scent like ozone and ash, a perfume of profound agony. This was a direct, public, and arrogant insult to the moon goddess. A fated bond was her most sacred gift. To reject it was spitting in her face. "Your Majesty," Caleb stammered, his alpha tone cracking under the pressure of the king's dominance. "This is a simple pack matter. She was unsuitable. She is just an Omega." The king's head snapped toward him. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply looked at Caleb. The air temperature in the clearing dropped by 20 degrees. Caleb choked on his next word, the air freezing in his lungs. The king's aura flared, a suffocating blanket of pure dominance that forced Caleb to his knees. Just an Omega. The words echoed in the king's mind. He had ruled for centuries. He had seen alphas rise and fall. He knew power when he saw it, and he knew arrogance. But as he looked back at the girl, he smelled something else beneath the agony. It was faint, buried deep, but it was there, a scent of winter pine, ancient stone, and a spark of dormant fiery magic. It was a scent that had no business being in a weak Omega. It was a scent that called to him. His rage, which had been a cold, calculated thing, now had a new, personal edge. These fools hadn't just insulted the goddess. They had broken something precious. He ignored Caleb's pathetic wheezing. He ignored Victoria, who was hiding behind her new mate, her pretty face a mask of terror. He ignored Alpha Marcus, who was trembling on his platform. His entire world narrowed to the girl on the ground. In a move that sent a tidal wave of shock through the pack, King Dominic, the ruthless Lycan King, knelt in the dirt. He knelt before the rejected Omega. He reached out a single black-gloved hand, his movement slow, deliberate. His fingers, symbols of so much death and power, hovered over her tear-streaked face. He brushed a matted strand of hair from her cheek. She was cold, lifeless. "They did this to you," he whispered, so low only he could hear. He hooked his gloved hand under her chin, his touch firm. "Look at me." The command was not a request. It was an ancient law imbued with a power that bypassed her broken consciousness and spoke directly to her soul. Nora's eyelids fluttered. She was trapped in a black, agonizing void. The pain of Caleb's rejection was the only thing that existed. But this voice, it was a new sun burning through the darkness. She was forced to obey. Her eyes, dull, glassy, and swimming with unshed tears, opened. They were empty. She was a shell, her spirit already half gone. Her unfocused, broken gaze drifted up and met his. The world ended. It was not a gentle hum, not a silver thread of fate. It was a cataclysm, a supernova of destiny. The moment her broken blue eyes met his burning gold ones, a bond exploded into existence. It was a golden, fiery, and furious connection that slammed into them both with the force of a physical blow. Nora gasped, a ragged, desperate intake of breath, as the bond, a king's bond, seized her very essence. It was a power so vast it was terrifying. It surged from Dominic into her, a tidal wave of ancient strength, and it met a tiny, dormant spark deep within her own soul, fanning it into an inferno. For Nora, the agonizing, tearing pain of Caleb's rejection was instantly and utterly incinerated. It was vaporized, as if it had never existed. In its place, this new, golden power flooded her, mending the tear in her spirit, sealing the wound in her soul. It was warm, it was absolute, and it was possessive. For Dominic, it was a shock that rocked him to his core. He, who had lived for 1,000 years, who had long assumed his fated mate was dust, had found her here, now. A broken child kneeling in the mud, rejected by a pathetic alpha pup. The scent he'd detected, pine and stone and magic, it was her. It was his. His rage, already a mountain, became a volcano. This was not just an insult to the goddess. This was not just the breaking of a pack Omega. This was a direct, personal, and unforgivable assault on his queen. Nora's eyes, which had been empty, suddenly focused. She was no longer looking at a terrifying stranger. She was no longer looking at a king. She was looking at the other half of her own soul. The pain was gone. The confusion was gone. There was only him. Dominic's face, which had been a mask of cold fury, twisted into something far more dangerous. He rose to his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest, his golden eyes burning with a new, terrifying purpose. He had not just found an injustice, he had found his mate. The power radiating from the king and the Omega was a tangible thing, a crackling golden aura that shimmered in the moonlight, pushing back against the cold. Nora was still on her knees, but she was no longer a heap. Her back was straight, her head high. Her eyes, now clear and sharp, were locked on Dominic. Caleb, who had managed to get to his feet, stared in disbelief. The scent of his broken bond with Nora was gone, replaced by an overwhelming, possessive, and ancient scent that was coming from her. From the king. "What? What did you do?" Caleb stammered, his voice weak. She was yours to cherish, yours to protect, yours to honor," Dominic snarled. His head snapped to Caleb, and this time there was no cold calculation in his eyes. There was only the white-hot promise of death. He took one slow step toward Caleb and Victoria. They stumbled back, tripping over each other. Victoria, who had been smirking just moments before, was now as white as the moon above, her eyes wide with terror. "You!" Dominic hissed, his voice a low, deadly vibration. He pointed a single black-gloved finger at Caleb, You have rejected your destiny. You have defiled a sacred bond. You have cast aside the one chosen for you by the moon goddess. He paused, a cruel, cold smile touching his lips. He let his gaze slide to Victoria, who whimpered and tried to hide behind Caleb. You cast her aside for this. For ambition. For a worthless, hollow-hearted... He cut himself off, his fury too great for simple insults. He turned back to Caleb, his eyes blazing. And in your arrogance, in your blindness, you have delivered her to me. The last two words were a shockwave. Dominic stalked back to Nora. He didn't offer his hand. He gripped her arm, his touch firm and possessive, and pulled her to her feet. He hauled her against his side, tucking her small frame against his. A clear, unmistakable gesture of ownership. She stumbled, her legs still weak, but he held her up, his arm a band of steel around her waist. Caleb stared, his mind finally comprehending the sheer scale of his mistake. No, he whispered, you can't. She's an Omega. She's nothing. Dominic actually laughed, a short, harsh, and terrifying sound. He looked down at Nora, his golden eyes momentarily softening as he took in her shocked but steady gaze. He turned his head, looking directly at the horrified pack. "Witness!" he commanded. "Witness what happens to a gift of the goddess when it is given to one who is worthy." "No!" Caleb screamed, a desperate broken sound. He lunged forward, driven by a sudden, agonizing wave of jealousy he couldn't understand. "She's mine!" He didn't make it 2 steps. King Dominic didn't even look at him. He simply flared his aura, and an invisible wall of power slammed into Caleb, throwing him backward as if he'd been hit by a tree. He crashed to the ground, skidding in the dirt, the air knocked from his lungs. "She," Dominic snarled, his eyes flashing, "is everything." He turned his full attention back to Nora. She was trembling, not from fear, but from the raw, volcanic power of the king's bond singing in her veins. It was a roaring lion, where Caleb's bond had been a dying bird. Dominic lifted his free hand, his bare fingers tracing the line of her jaw, his gaze possessive. "They will never hurt you again," he vowed, his voice a low promise that was more binding than any oath. She believed him. He tilted her head, exposing the pale, vulnerable skin of her neck, right where a faded mark should have been. She drew a sharp, sudden breath, her eyes locking with his. There was no question in his gaze, no hesitation. There was only certainty. This was not a choice. This was destiny. "You are mine," he growled. He lowered his head. He didn't just nip. He didn't just mark. He claimed. His fangs, longer and sharper than any normal wolf's, extended. He sank his teeth deep into the claiming spot, branding her, binding her body and soul to him for eternity. The moment his fangs pierced her skin, the king's bond detonated. It was not pain. It was a blinding, healing, ecstatic fire. The last spiritual shards of Caleb's broken bond were instantly incinerated. Nora screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated power. Her bones felt as if they were being reforged, her blood turning to liquid gold. The ancient strength of the Lycan lineage flooded her, not as a gift, but as an awakening. It unlocked a power that had been dormant in her own bloodline for generations. A visible wave of golden energy erupted from her, a shockwave of pure magic that blasted outward, forcing the entire pack to shield their eyes. Dominic lifted his head. His lips were stained with her blood. He licked the wound clean, his tongue sealing the mark, and it healed instantly, leaving behind a new, intricate, and glowing golden mark. The mark of a queen. Nora's eyes, which had been filling with tears, flew open. The terrified pale blue of the Omega was gone. They were now a bright, sharp, and startling shade of sapphire, ringed with the same unnatural burning gold as his. She was no longer Nora, the rejected. She was Nora, the claimed. The clearing was silent, save for Caleb's ragged, choked sobs. He was kneeling, staring at the golden mark on Nora's neck, his face a mask of profound, soul-shattering regret. His bond was truly gone, and the void it left was a black hole of agony that he would never recover from. Nora stood tall, her hand resting on the king's chest. The world was new. The colors were sharper, the smells overwhelming. She could smell the sour, acidic fear coming from Victoria. She could smell the acrid, sickening self-loathing pouring from Caleb. And beneath it all, she could smell him. Dominic, her mate. He smelled of pine, of ozone, of ancient stone, an absolute, unshakable power. The new golden energy hummed in her veins, a comforting, heavy weight. King Dominic kept her tucked against his side, his arm a possessive shield. He surveyed the stunned, prostrate pack. His gaze was glacial. "The Moonstone Pack," he stated, his voice flat and void of all emotion, "is in disgrace. You have insulted your goddess. You have permitted the desecration of a sacred bond. You have wronged your queen." The word queen struck the pack like a physical blow. A new, desperate wave of prostration rippled through the crowd. Alpha Marcus, his face pressed into the dirt, pleaded, "Your Majesty, Queen Nora, forgive us. We did not know. It was my son." "It was," Dominic agreed, his voice deadly. He looked at Caleb. "A mistake he will have a lifetime to regret." Victoria, her mind finally snapping, let out a hysterical laugh. No, it's a trick. I'm the Luna. He chose me. She's an Omega. She's nothing." "Be silent," Nora said. Her voice was quiet. It was not a shout. It was not a plea. But it was laced with the new golden power of her bond, and it carried the authority of the king. Victoria's hysterical shrieks cut off instantly as if her throat had been squeezed shut. The entire pack flinched. Nora, the Omega, had just commanded silence, and she had received it. Dominic looked down at her, a flicker of dark pride in his golden eyes. "There is nothing for you here," he said, his voice softer, for her alone. Nora looked at the pack members who had scorned her. She looked at her sister, who was now weeping silent, furious tears. And she looked at Caleb, the man who had been her sun and stars, and felt nothing. Only a cold, distant pity. He was pathetic. He was weak. The king was right. She turned her back on all of it, the clearing, her family, her entire life. She did not feel a single pang of loss. "Come," Dominic commanded. He began to walk towards the edge of the forest, and Nora, the once weak Omega, walked with him, her steps steady, her head high. As they moved, silent, black-clad Lycan warriors, the king's royal guard, materialized from the shadows, their golden eyes identical to his. They formed a silent, lethal perimeter around their king and his new queen. Nora took her first step out of the clearing, her hand still resting on her mate's arm, leaving her past to rot. She was heading to the Lykan King's court, a place of treacherous ancient power. She was terrified, but as she felt the steady, possessive thrum of the king's bond, she was, for the first time in her life, not weak. 3 months later, the decree went out like a thunderclap. It was not a request. It was a royal summons carried by the king's own imperial guard, their black and gold armor a terrifying sight. The news spread through the Lycan court like wildfire. The king, in his cold wisdom, was not murdering his new mate in the shadows. He was putting her, and her accusers, on public trial. An anonymous letter had arrived, claiming Nora was a spy, that her rejection was staged, that she still plotted with Caleb. It was Victoria's final, desperate move, a masterpiece of paranoia. But the king had built a trap. He had surveillance. He had witnesses. He had the truth. When they gathered in the grand clearing once more, the entire Moonstone Pack forced to their knees, Victoria and Caleb brought in chains, Dominic stood with Nora at his side. The trial was swift. The beta traveler Victoria had bribed confessed. The surveillance reports proved Caleb had never left the pack house, never met with anyone. Victoria's lies unraveled before the assembled masses. It worked on Peter. She sobbed, her careful facade crumbling. It was supposed to work on you. She had just confessed her own treason. Caleb, finally understanding the depth of Victoria's manipulation, publicly severed all ties to her. I want nothing to do with you, he spat. You are nothing to this pack. You are nothing to me. Then he turned to Nora, dropping to his knees in the dirt before the woman he had cast aside. My queen, he choked out. I was a fool. I was blind, arrogant. I rejected my destiny. I will live with that forever. All eyes were on Nora. Victoria grabbed the hem of her midnight blue gown, sobbing. Nora, please. You're my sister. You have to forgive me. I didn't know. I was jealous. The entire Moonstone pack watched, witnessing the final, absolute reversal of power. Nora looked down at her sister. She felt the cold wind of the clearing, the same wind that had chilled her on the night of her rejection. She remembered the physical, soul-splitting pain. Then she looked at Dominic. He was watching her, his golden eyes intense, his expression unreadable. He was not interfering. This was her justice to pass. Slowly, deliberately, Nora reached down. Victoria's eyes lit with wild, desperate hope, but Nora didn't take her hand. She simply unhooked Victoria's fingers from the velvet one by one and took a single step back, breaking the contact. No, Nora said. Her voice was not loud. It was not angry. It was quiet, cold, and final, carrying the ancient authority of the Lycan lineage. You are not my sister, she said, her voice clear in the silence. You are a lesson. She turned from Victoria's crumpled form. She looked at Caleb, still kneeling, his head bowed in shame. He was a ghost, a living monument to his own arrogance. He would be alpha of this disgraced pack, forever bound to his mistake, forever living in the void he had created. That was a sentence more profound than any she could pass. She had faced her tormentors. She had seen their lies exposed. She had watched them break each other. And she was finally free. Nora turned her back on her sister's broken sobs and her former mate's hollow regret. She turned her back on the Moonstone pack and the small, sad life she had once been forced to live. She walked across the clearing, her steps steady, her head held high. She stopped in front of Dominic, the King of Kings, her mate. He held out his hand. She took it, their fingers laced together, and the power of their bond flared to life, a visible golden aura that shimmered around them both, a silent promise of a new future. He looked down at her, and his harsh, kingly features softened into a look of fierce, possessive, and absolute pride. My queen, he murmured, loud enough for all to hear. He pulled her to his side, and together they turned to face the stunned, silent clearing. Nora, the rejected Omega, was gone. In her place stood Nora, the Lycan queen, her spirit forged in betrayal, her power awakened by destiny and her future secured at the side of her king.